Hey YouTube, Kevin Cleary with a knife video. Today I've got a comparison between a couple of knives that are not exactly the same. Certainly they're both designed with sort of a martial purpose, a combat purpose in mind. And to me, they do put me in mind of one another, okay? The first one is the Spyderco Szabo. Now this Szabo looks like a big imposing blade until you see the other blade that I want to compare it to, and that is the cold steel Espada. You can see the Espada dwarfs the Szabo, and the Szabo dwarfs a lot of blades, okay? I want to give you a good idea that these are big by showing you the 0 tolerance 0562. This is more like a typical folding knife size. It's about 8 1/4 or 8.5 inches, something like that. More what we're used to carrying for EDC. And so if I show you those knives together, there it is with the Espada. I'm going to put it down and show you right. And there it is with the Szabo. This gives you a better idea that the Szabo is a large blade, but just not really compared to the Espada, which is a massive blade. Okay, so the reason I want to compare these two is because I think the blade shapes are similar. They're obviously very, obviously these would be options for, you know, a civilian contractor, a police officer, some member of some branch of the military, anyone who could need a knife in a combat scenario. These knives ought to be on the list. You know, which one it should be, you know, we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. But I think both of them fit the bill. All right. Now, I want to point out that in terms of price, they're not that comparable. Okay, the Szabo's a little over $200. The Espada is a little over $100. However, probably most of you watching already know this, there is a higher end version of the Espada. There's the aluminum bolstered version, and it's a little fancier satin finished blade. Looks really, really cool. And that version is like 230 bucks, okay? So that version of the Espada is very similar in terms of price point to the Szabo. Now, the other thing that I need to mention is that this blade is AUS 8 steel. As you guys know, cold steel is mostly switching to CTS 204P, which is awesome. Great steel. Great performance so far for me, and I've got a couple of blades with that steel in them, and I have been enjoying it. However, this is the AUS 8 version, okay? So I'll probably have to make a few comments about blade steel as we kind of get to the blade portion of the discussion. All right, so let's go right ahead and jump into what we want to talk about, and we'll start off with size and weight. This is how we always do it when I do these comparisons. The Szabo just happens to be on the left side of the page, and so I'm going to start off with that one. The Szabo is 10 3/8 inches long, so it is a large knife. 4 5/8 inches of blade, and it's got 5 7/8 inches of handle, so almost 6-inch handle, almost 5 3/4 inch blade, 10 3/8 altogether. And this knife weighs in at a fairly hefty 6.9 ounces, although I will say this, 6.9 ounces is not outlandish for what this is, okay? You've got a very large, very heavy duty folding knife here, okay? And so for that amount of size, just the sheer size alone pretty well justifies the weight, okay? Even if you look at the thickness of the scales and the blade and everything else, you can understand why this knife weighs as much as it does, almost 7 ounces. Now, those numbers all sounded big until we go to the Espada, which is 12.5 inches. It's over a foot long. The blade is 5.5 inches, and the handle is 7 1/4 inches. Okay, so you've got a big blade right here. Okay, of course this weighs in at 8.7 ounces. So quite a bit heavier, about 2 ounces heavier, although you're getting 2 more inches, and actually 2 1/8 more inches of knife, okay? And that certainly will come into play in the discussion, because even if I choke down on the Szabo, which you can do, both of these knives do a great job of giving you multiple grips. However, look at the difference in reach. There's almost 3 inches in difference in terms of how far I can reach out with this knife versus this one. And this one still has a lot of reach, okay? Now, one of the things we've got to say along these lines is, how does that carry? If you were seriously, your life is in danger, you're in a combat zone every day, someone is out to hunt you down and kill you, and you've got to have some self-defense with you, so you're going to carry this all the time, everywhere, every minute, and that's your purpose for carrying it, so it's got to be with you all the time. Well, which one's going to carry better? Depends on your situation a little, okay? And I know that sounds silly, but the Espada, these weird names are going to get to me through this whole video, guys. So the Espada is much thinner. The Szabo is thicker, but it's lighter and smaller overall. Now I will say the Szabo fits in lots of pockets fairly easily. I do have pants that I cannot fit the Espada in the pants pocket. Okay, I would add that if it's that dire that you have a Marshall style blade with you, then you may carry it somewhere else. You could carry it on your belt. You could carry it inside the pants. I know a lot of guys carry the Espada that way. You could carry it on a belt loop, whatever. There are different things you could do if you had to absolutely have this with you. And a lot of soldiers, maybe a pocket knife is not that doable for you. Maybe strapped to your gear somewhere on your person is more appropriate or realistic. So that puts us in a whole new category, okay? So there's the first point, size and weight. This one is going to carry a little easier than this one, generally speaking, although this one is flatter. So if you're going to maybe carry in a waistband or something like that, this one may actually be easier. But for pocket carry, the Szabo does come out on top. Obviously, for the smaller size and the lighter weight, you are getting a smaller knife. So if you really feel like you need that large knife, by the way, if this is a tool for you, if you do something in your life where you need a knife of this size and this length on you all the time, maybe you work in the fish industry, if you're chopping heads off fish all day and you want a big heavy knife to do it, sure, this would do the job just fine, and would do the job, by the way, better than the Szabo. As a work knife, I think this is probably the way to go for most people, okay? There are work applications, and I mentioned that in the review of this. There are lots of ways that you could use this as just a tool, okay? The Szabo, yes, there are ways you could use it as a tool, and there may be things that require that sharp point. There may be things that need a recurve. It's not quite as well suited to actual cutting tasks because of the blade grind, which we'll get to in a couple of minutes. So for carry and for size and weight, the Szabo, I think, comes out ahead, and we'll talk more about this, but I think both of these blades are going to be pretty capable if you know what you're doing in a Marshall situation. If you don't have any idea what you're doing, maybe the edge would go to the Espada. All right, so now let's move on to the blade. And since we started with the Szabo first, we'll stick with the Szabo. The Szabo does have this 4 5/8 inch blade. It's 4 1/4 inches of cutting edge, so that's a pretty good ratio there. Even though you do have this half choil at the front, you still get a good amount of cutting edge. And for what this blade is actually doing, because of this big cutter on the back, it's not a huge blade, even though it looks like a huge blade, okay? It is very thick and very tough. The point is rather acute, so you'd have to be aware of that in any kind of, if you're thinking of this as a tool, just be aware, don't go using it for anything that might break the tip off. Otherwise, though, oh, by the way, it is S30V blade steel, and it is a hollow grind, and it's a fairly abrupt hollow grind, okay, so it's quite steep. Now that does give you a fairly good edge geometry. It's fairly fine at the edge. However, it's thickening very quickly. All right, and I have done a lot of cutting with this blade, and I can tell you that it's an acceptable slicer, but not a fantastic one. And the reason it's not fantastic is because of that very thick blade stock, okay? If you want a really good slicing blade, a very high flat grind and a slightly thinner blade stock obviously is going to perform a little better. So that's the blade. Again, 4 5/8 inches, 4 1/4 inches of cutting edge. It is S30V blade steel, which is a very, very good steel, and it's going to hold an edge for you very well. And it's a mediocre slicer. I mean, it'll do it, and it'll do it better than, say, the Lion Steel SR1 or some other blades that we've talked about, but it's not going to be the end-all and be-all. Now, let's go on to the Espada. And now, boy, that's a big blade, isn't it, guys? This is AUS-8 steel. I'm going to assume that this will be coming out in CTS 204P. I will say this, the CTS 204P that Cold Steel is using does not seem to be hardened to the same level as my Spydercos in that steel. It is a little easier to sharpen and performs well, holds an edge well. I have no complaints about it. Certainly it's going to be a big step up from AUS-8, but I would say it's a little softer than Spyderco's CTS 204P that are in, I think, the Domino and a couple others. Okay, so this blade is now 5.5 inches, and this blade does even better than the last one. Even though, notice you've got all of this that's unsharpened, you still, because of this big belly, end up with your full 5.5 inches of cutting edge. By the way, I should have mentioned that there's a slight recurve here, and I do like a recurve for any kind of whittling work. It does work really well, and it also puts that belly right out in front. Okay, so if you hold this knife down here, because of the sort of S shape, it does move the belly to a situation where it's going to slash really, really well. The same is true on the Espada. Tons of belly, and that belly is right in sort of the sweet spot for using this in a combat situation. By the way, it also works well. There is enough flat blade here that you can use this for lots of different tasks. I've done food prep with this. I've done woodworking with it. I've done a bunch of different things, and it does work well as a tool. Now, this blade slices much better. It's also a hollow grind, but look at the difference. Okay, so the steel is just a little thicker on the Szabo, but look how far you've got to travel. Okay, so between the edge and the flat, here's the edge and here's the flat. What have you got? Like a little over 1/2 inch here, and here you've got like a full inch. And so that distance means that there's a much gentler wedge effect on the Espada than on the Szabo. Okay. The other thing is the Espada does carry more material out to the tips. If you look at the tips of both these blades, there's more material out here than there is out here. Okay. So the blades are both very, very capable. There's one thing I want to point out. I guess I'll do it now so I don't forget later. One thing I would say is the Szabo has done a better job of lining up the point of this. If you're using a knife in a combat situation, a thrust attack is going to be pretty critical. Okay, the Szabo does a better job of lining up the point with the rest of your arm. Okay, so a thrust attack is going to be stronger and easier to achieve ergonomically with the Szabo. With the Espada, if you hold it naturally, the tip is kind of facing up. So here's a natural hold on the Espada. See how the angle is going this way. Here's a natural hold on the Szabo. See how the tip is much flatter. Okay, that's because of the blade shape primarily, and a little bit to do with the handle shape, but more so the blade in this case. If this tip was down here, it would be more effective in a thrust attack. Now, having said that, because of the size and weight on the Espada is going to be much more effective in any kind of chopping or slashing. You know, this thing is a very serious weapon, okay? This is a knife that if you ever used it as a weapon, it's just as dangerous as a gun. Okay, so you should really think about the same things. If you're a firearms owner, you've probably had that thought. At what point would I ever use this to defend my life? Well, you better have that same conversation with yourself in regards to this knife. if I ever had to use this to defend my life, I have to realize that I'm now using lethal force. Okay, so not that I recommend doing that necessarily, but you just need to think that through. And I guess that's true of anyone who carries a knife or anything. You know, you pick up a weapon, even if you're a construction worker and you pick up your hammer on your construction site, hey, that's a deadly weapon, okay? So think through that before making any kind of decision. I'm not saying there's not a point where it may be necessary to defend your life with lethal force. I know those things happen every day, but just think about it, okay? Be mentally and emotionally prepared, legally maybe prepared to deal with that kind of a situation. Let's talk about lockup and deployment. By the way, if we're thinking of soldiers or police officers or something who are in that situation more often, then that's probably something you've already had to think about and had specific training for. Okay, let's move on and talk about lockup and deployment. Both of these are fairly quick, but not knives that I can flick out. There's probably some people out there who can flick one or both of these knives. I'm not one. Now I will say this. This knife does wave out of pocket extremely effectively. Okay, I've tested that a lot, and I think I demonstrated it in the full review of this video. If you want to see that, go over there. This will wave out of pocket. This will definitely not wave out of pocket, although a wave mod would be fairly easy on this. I know I've had some people request that, and I'll get to it, okay? I promise. A couple people have requested trying the zip tie mod and see if this will wave out of pocket. I think it would, okay? I just haven't got a chance to try it yet. I've had a bunch of stuff on the go right now. So that's on the list. I know the request is out there, and I do plan to try it out just in case you're watching going, yeah, Kevin, we asked you about that months ago. I know. All right, so lockup and deployment. Both of these, if they're already in hand, they're very, very similar. Okay, neither one of them I can flick out. Both of them, though, I can open just fine and close just fine. The lockup on both of these is quite strong. Now, they're strong for different reasons. There's certainly different designs. The triad lock, I'm not going to put any lock up against the triad lock. I don't know if you guys have seen what Cold Steel has been doing recently. Today they posted another video comparing the CRKT M16 with the Voyager, I believe. They have done a couple with the Espada. They're really putting that triad lock through its paces, and it blows away the competition. Like, it's sad how poorly other other folding knives do. Now, I will say this, the compression lock is very strong. Okay, the mechanics of this lock are actually somewhat similar to this lock in that they transfer force to that stop pin very effectively. Again, though, you're hard-pressed to compare anything to a triad lock. I can honestly say that I have chopped with a triad lock in real life, and not with this knife, but with the Voyager. I've actually chopped tree branches off. I chopped it into some fence boards to see if I could chop in and get it to stay there. And that hard whacking did nothing to the lock. I wouldn't recommend you do that to yours. Definitely I don't want anyone sending me a message saying, Kevin, I tried that with my knife after watching your video. If you do that, you might break your knife. Okay, so I'm telling you now, don't go and do it saying Kevin said it would work. But the triad lock is a very, very strong lock. So both of these, I think, having said that, the compression lock, and especially this compression lock, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time on this. I spent time with the compression lock, so bear with me. This lock, I spent time with the triad lock. This lock is a compression lock, and it even goes a step further than the compression lock on the Para 2 and on the Yojimbo, where there's a small tab of this leaf spring between the blade and the stop pin. This actually has a hole drilled through it, and the stop pin is going right through this. Okay, so it's pretty cool. It would be very difficult to get this lock to fail. Okay, just as you look at it, the construction of it, the size of the tab of steel here, essentially what you're doing is you have the stop pin here and the blade tang. So here's the stop pin, here's the blade tang. between these two, let's do it this way so you can kind of see there's some space. Between these two, in order to get the blade to close, you have a piece of steel, and it's sitting in here this way. Now this becomes the piece of steel and being pinched. And in order to get that lock to fail, that would either, there's no angle, there's nothing to make it slide back and forth. That thing would have to compress in some way, and I'm not even sure how that would happen. I would suspect that probably the stop pin or the pivot screw would deform in some way before that piece of steel compressed, okay? Because they're under shear force, and shear force is different than compression. You're not gonna just smush a piece of steel. It's very, very difficult, okay? So extremely strong lock. In fact, you should know that this is actually for checking, for arm checking around the neck, for any kind of compliance holds. And Lacey Szabo is very good at that, which is why he designed the knife that way. In order, you've got to have an unbelievable amount of confidence in that lock before you try to do something like that. Okay, so both very, very strong locks. I'm probably going to give the edge to the triad lock for strength. And in terms of speed, where you could give it to a lot of Spydercos, you're going to deploy way faster than a lot of cold steels. However, the Szabo, not so. There's a spring in here that keeps constant tension on this blade, which means you can't just flick this out, okay? It's never going to be a free dropper. It's designed not to be, so that it can't close on your fingers. Notice, even if I open it like that much, it can't fall closed, okay? There's a spring in there constantly putting pressure on that blade. All right, so because of that, neither one are going to fly out very fast. The Espada, I'm going to say, gets the edge on this for two reasons. One, it can be waved out of pocket, and two, the triad lock is amazing. Okay, so the Espada, sorry, the name just escaped me for a second. The Espada certainly gets the edge when it comes to lockup and deployment. Okay, now let's talk about the handle next. Both of these handles are very good, and both of them do something that's pretty interesting. They allow for a number of different grips. You could choke way up like this on the Szabo. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. You could go way down. Reverse grip is fantastic. In fact, this is specifically designed for a reverse grip, by the way. This is not necessarily designed for that, but it'll work. Let me just demonstrate. Very good in reverse grip as well. But the Szabo is actually designed to be used in a reverse grip. This is Lacey Szabo's fighting style, okay? To use the knife this way. And that's why this belly is out here, so that if I have my hand flat, I'll try and bend this way. Here's my fingers. Look where the sharpened edge of the knife is. It actually extends past my hand. So in a reverse grip, this knife functions extremely well. That's why this is meant for checking arms, for throws, for grabs, that kind of stuff. That's what this little cutout is doing here. And so this knife does excel in a reverse grip very, very, very well. The Espada, not so much. It's not really designed for that kind of grip. Certainly it works. It's a lot more awkward, by the way. Not that I would, if you're ever at a point where you've got to use your knife to defend yourself, don't try doing any fancy flips or rolls or anything like that. Just hold on tight, okay? But this does allow for a few different grips and does allow for a huge amount of reach. Now, part of that is just a function of the size, okay? You can choke way down on this and get a whole lot of reach, and you can choke down on this and get a whole lot of reach. But if I put my arms side by side and then turn them up so you can see, notice how here's the Szabo blade down here. I don't know if you can see it. There we go. So notice there's a good 2 inches of distance there that you're gaining with the Espada. However, again, that handle has got to be fit in your pocket. Okay, so both of these handles are very comfortable. By the way, this is not really fair. Okay, a comfortable handle is super easy to achieve in a knife this large. It's only in smaller blades that a comfortable handle becomes an issue because you have way less real estate to work with. Obviously, you're going to be able to get your whole hand around either one of these knives. Obviously, you're going to have multiple grip options just because of the sheer size. Now, one thing I will say is a win for me is this extra unsharpened portion on the Espada really allows you to choke up and turn this into a much shorter knife than it is. Yeah, you've got a lot of the pommel sticking out there, but if you needed to do some finer work, some kind of real cutting chore, this knife is going to work well. This knife, it does work, no question. I've used this for EDC tests quite a lot and had no problems. The Espada is just a little bit better, okay? Now, that's not a function of the handle, so I've kind of gotten off topic. Both of these are very comfortable. The Szabo is just a little more comfortable in hand, probably because it's not so wide and narrow. The Espada allows for more grip options, okay? So it's sort of half and half on these two. All right, so which one, that kind of gives everything we need. Oh, both pocket clips are completely fine. No lanyard hole at all in the Espada, a very big lanyard hole on the Szabo, if that's an issue for you. Now the handle materials, this is where the things get a little bit different. If we add the component of sort of cool factor and pride of ownership, this is a gorgeous knife. This is as much a piece of artwork as it is a folding knife. This is a little more utilitarian. Now I know there's a fancy version of this and they would be more comparable, but even then you're still getting aluminum and G10. Okay, in this you're getting this very nice checked carbon fiber over G10. Very, very attractive looking. By the way, the finish on this blade is also totally gorgeous, and I should have spoken to that when I mentioned the blade. Aesthetically, and in terms of pride of ownership, I think the Szabo takes it, even when compared to the higher end Espada. Now that's my mileage, okay? You may think the Espada is the most beautiful knife that's ever been invented, and when we come to looks, we're in a world of subjectivism, okay? There's no real objective measurement for the way a knife looks, okay? Now, so handle, as I said, is kind of 50-50. Both of them have pluses and minuses, and you'd have to decide which one you prefer. Now, overall, which one would I declare the winner in this sort of showdown? Guess what? I carry the Szabo much more, okay? For a regular person who's just, you know, Joe Blow walking down the street, the Szabo is much more carryable. It's much more usable as a folding knife because of its size. You know, it is black, and one of the advantages of it being black is that I've pulled this out in like McDonald's before to open a package. I've used it in different places, and you can be fairly discreet with it even though it's quite large. This knife is so large that there's no being discreet. You know, you pull this thing out in public and people are like, holy crap, what the heck is that? So that's where, in an overall general usefulness sense, the Szabo takes it for me, because I have carried this and I have used it a lot as just an EDC knife. It functions in that way. The Espada, if you're not in real, like a martial situation, life and death, or maybe doing some task where you need this knife, I could see this being handy to a fisherman who's got a, you know, if you've got a trout or a large salmon, yeah, this is going to take the head off pretty easily, right? Would the Szabo do it? You might not have enough reach on a really large fish, okay? So I understand that there are times and places where the Espada is going to work for you, but for the average Joe, I think the Szabo takes it. Now let's switch gears just a little bit and say you are a soldier, you're deployed overseas, and you need a knife that you can pull to defend your life, and you know that's the only purpose for carrying it, then the Espada may be a knife you want, because it's just so big and so capable that, yeah, as a weapon, and purely a weapon, you're not even thinking about what you're going to do, any other task for it, the Espada probably takes it, just because it's so big and gives you that extra reach and that extra slashing ability. Okay, so that's my take on these two blades. Both of these are really, really cool, and I really like both of them. And I will tell you, every time I open one, I kind of think about the other, because the blades just remind me of one another. They do. They both have this big belly. They're both large knives, not obviously one is much larger, but because of the blade shape, they do remind me of one another, and even because of the sort of S-shaped style of the blades. So that's why I wanted to do this comparison. I hope you enjoyed it. They are just cool knives, okay? Let's give you one last look as we kind of finish this off. So, as I said, purely combat probably goes to the Espada, a knife that you're thinking, hey, I just want a really nice high-end EDC that, if it really came down to it, would be capable in a combat role. Then the Szabo takes it. If it's just purely combat, then the Espada takes it. Both are beautiful blades. And of course, this is my opinion. Maybe you have both of these as well, and you always carry the Espada and you never carry the Szabo. That's great too. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll talk to you later.